Welcome to our deep dive today. You shared this book with me, and wow, that title, Unterwegs mit Pascal Band the First, Über den Menschenbetrachtungen auf Solfegen. It's quite the mouthful.
It is quite a title.
Yeah, but from what I've gathered, it's not like a typical biography about Blaise Pascal, the mathematician.
Right.
Instead, it's more of an exploration of his pensées. Have you had a chance to look into those yet?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, they're supposed to be quite a collection of philosophical reflections, often fragmented and unfinished.
Yeah, from what I've read, they're like these snapshots into Pascal's mind towards the end of his life. And knowing he was struggling with all these big questions about the meaning of life, human limitations, and even the role of the heart, it makes you wonder what kind of conclusions he might have reached if he had more time.
That heart part always gets me, for a logic-driven mathematician to put so much emphasis on the heart, it seems like a paradox.
It really does. And then you add in the author Eric Mührel. His background is this interesting mix of Catholic theology and then social work and social pedagogy.
Wow.
So it makes you wonder how his own perspective kind of shapes how he's reading and interpreting Pascal's work.
Okay, so let's break down these pensées a little bit for our listener.
Okay.
From what I understand, they're this collection of Pascal's notes and thoughts and arguments. Many of them touch on philosophical and religious themes.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that they weren't meant to be a polished final work.
Exactly. We're dealing with raw, unfiltered fragments.
Yeah.
And they sometimes even contradict each other, and they're definitely open to interpretation. It's kind of like we're trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing.
Yeah.
But that's kind of the beauty of it. It really invites discussion and debate, even centuries later.
Right, and that's where Mührel comes in. He does a nice job of structuring his book around three core themes that he finds within the pensée. The absurdity of the human condition, the shooting stars of knowledge and the heart, and its education.
Yeah, that first one, the absurdity of the human condition, that's classic Pascal.
Yeah.
It's where we really see him wrestle with this idea of the vastness of the universe against our very finite existence. You can almost feel the existential dread coming through his words.
Yeah, and he doesn't shy away from using some pretty vivid imagery.
No, he doesn't.
To get his point across, he talks about the eternal silence of infinite spaces.
Right.
This is a concept that I think resonates with anyone who's ever looked up at the night sky and felt a sense of awe and wonder and maybe even a little bit of unease.
It's that feeling of being completely insignificant,
Yeah.
like a speck of dust in this infinite expanse. And I think on some level, whether we're religious or not, that sense of smallness in the face of the cosmos is something we can all relate to.
I think so, too. And then he goes on to introduce this metaphor of the prisoner in the dungeon.
Right.
Which, let's be honest, it's a little bleak.
It is.
It's this picture of humanity united by this one shared fate, death.
Yeah.
But even in this bleakness, Pascal seems to find a coping mechanism, distraction.
Interesting.
So this raises a good question. I think that are distractions simply a way for us to avoid confronting the reality of our existence? Or are they actually essential for maintaining our sanity in a world filled with such stark realities?
Right.
Pascal seems to wrestle with both sides of that coin.
It seems so, yeah.
Now, the second theme, the shooting stars of knowledge. This one dives into Pascal's skepticism about human understanding.
Right.
Which is interesting because for someone who is so brilliant, in math and science,
Yes.
he also seemed to be very aware of how limited our knowledge actually is.
Yeah, it's almost like he anticipated a lot of the complexities that we grapple with today.
Yeah.
The more we learn, the more we realize we don't know. There's a certain humility in that.
Right.
A recognition that there's this vast amount of knowledge that we can't grasp.
Okay, and now for this third theme, the heart and its education. Now, this one might seem a little tricky, especially from, our perspective.
Yeah.
But before we just dismiss it, I think it's important to understand what Pascal actually meant by heart.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just about religious faith.
You're right. And Mührel really emphasizes that. He says this theme shouldn't scare off non-religious readers because Pascal's view of the heart had a much broader meaning. He was tapping into something beyond just pure logic. Things like intuition, gut feelings, emotional intelligence, all those things that can guide us in ways that reason sometimes can't.
So it's not just this purely faith-based thing.
Not at all, no.
Okay.
It's much more about a different way of knowing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's something that's really worth exploring.
For sure. And we'll definitely dig into that more in just a moment.
Sounds good. And he has this famous quote. He says, "The heart has its reasons, which reason does not know."
Yeah.
It's like he's acknowledging that pure intellect just isn't enough sometimes. And he's advocating for this more holistic way of understanding the world.
It's almost like he was a proto-humanist in some ways.
You could say that, yeah.
Even as a devout believer, he seemed to understand that there were these truths that could only be accessed through feeling and empathy and those less tangible aspects of human experience.
I think you're right.
So we have these three big themes, and within each one, Mührel offers 4 different ways to explore Pascal's thoughts.
Okay.
You can think of them like lenses through which we can examine these complex and often contradictory ideas.
That's a good way to put it.
Like he's giving us a map to navigate this philosophical landscape.
Yeah.
And some of the terrain can be pretty challenging, especially those bits that are really rooted in Pascal's religious beliefs.
Right.
But I think that's what makes it so interesting.
It does.
It forces us to confront these perspectives that might initially feel unfamiliar or even uncomfortable.
Definitely. And even if we ultimately disagree with Pascal's conclusions, I think there's value in like wrestling with his arguments and trying to understand where he was coming from.
Yeah.
It can help us clarify our own thinking and deepen our appreciation for the complexities of these philosophical questions.
For sure. Speaking of challenging terrain, let's revisit that first way under the theme of the absurdity of the human condition.
Okay.
The silence of infinite spaces.
Yeah.
It's a phrase that's both poetic and kind of unsettling.
I think what makes it so potent is that it taps into this like primal fear. The fear of being alone and insignificant, lost in this universe that's totally indifferent to our existence.
Yeah.
It's a fear that's probably been with us since like the very first humans looked up at the night sky and wondered about their place in it all.
You know, it's funny, when I think about that metaphor, my mind immediately jumps to those images from the Hubble Space Telescope.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
These vast swirling galaxies stretching out like as far as we can see.
It's mind-boggling.
And within those galaxies, billions upon billions of stars, and who knows how many planets orbiting them.
It really puts things in perspective.
It does, and Pascal was writing about this back in the 17th century, long before we had the technology to even begin to grasp the true scale of the cosmos.
Right.
It's amazing.
It is.
It's a testament to his insight and his ability to articulate those existential anxieties that have probably been with us since the dawn of consciousness.
And I think it's even more relevant today.
Yeah.
Given our understanding of the universe.
Right.
In Pascal's time, it was still possible to believe that humanity was at the center of it all.
Right.
But now that illusion has been shattered.
Yeah, we're not at the center of anything. We're just along for the ride on this pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan put it.
Exactly.
And that can be a really difficult thing to accept, especially for those of us who don't find comfort in religion.
Because if there's no inherent meaning or purpose out there in the universe, then it's up to us to create it. And that's a pretty daunting responsibility.
It is, but it's also incredibly liberating.
That's true.
It means we have the freedom to define our own values, to find our own meaning in a world that might otherwise seem cold and indifferent.
I love that perspective.
Yeah.
It's empowering. Instead of looking outward for answers, we can turn inward and find meaning in our relationships, our actions, our contributions to the world.
We become the authors of our own stories.
Exactly.
I love that. And that's something that I think speaks to us as humanists.
Yeah.
We're not beholden to any dogma or any external authority. We have the freedom to chart our own course, to create a life that is meaningful and fulfilling on our own terms.
That's the beauty of it.
Okay, so we've explored the silence of infinite spaces.
Right.
Now let's talk about that other rather gloomy metaphor, the prisoner in the dungeon.
Okay.
Not exactly a feel-good image,
yeah,
but it does speak to something very fundamental about the human condition.
It does. It's this stark reminder of our mortality.
Yeah.
The fact that we're all, in a sense, condemned to death from the moment we're born. We're all just living out our sentences in this metaphorical dungeon, waiting for the inevitable.
And what I find really striking is the way Pascal emphasizes the communal nature of this experience.
Yeah.
We're not alone in our fear of death. It unites all of humanity, regardless of our social status, our beliefs, our achievements.
It's the great equalizer in a way.
We're all in this together.
And that's actually a point where I think Pascal's religious beliefs and our humanist perspective can kind of intersect.
Interesting.
Even though we might not believe in an afterlife,
right,
we can still acknowledge this shared nature of our mortality and maybe even find some solace in it.
I like that.
It's a reminder that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, even if that something is simply the collective human experience.
That's a beautiful thought. It takes the sting out of the bleakness a little bit,
It does a bit.
knowing that we're all facing this same existential dilemma.
Right.
We're all part of this grand interconnected web of life.
And it's also a reminder to savor the time that we have.
Yeah.
To appreciate the beauty and the fragility of life, knowing that it's finite, can actually make us more present, more grateful for each moment.
It's like that saying, life is a terminal illness, but the diagnosis is excellent.
I love that.
We just have to make the most of the time we're given.
Exactly. And Pascal would probably agree with that sentiment, even though he'd frame it within his own religious worldview.
Yeah.
He was very concerned with how people spent their time and whether they were truly living authentically.
Which brings us back to his idea of distraction as a coping mechanism.
Right.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it?
It is.
On the one hand, distractions can help us avoid dwelling on the more unpleasant aspects of existence, like, our inevitable demise.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they can also prevent us from fully engaging with life and finding true meaning.
It's all about finding that balance.
Right.
Knowing when to allow ourselves a little escapism and when to confront those big questions head on.
And I think that's where Pascal's insights can be really helpful, even for those of us who aren't religious. He forces us to examine our relationship with distractions and ask ourselves, are they truly serving us, or are they just numbing us to the realities of life?
He's encouraging us to be more mindful, more intentional about how we spend our time and energy.
Yeah.
Because in the end, it's those moments of genuine connection, of purpose-driven action that give our lives meaning.
And that leads us right back to this core tension in Pascal's work.
Okay.
The interplay between heart and reason.
Right.
I think it's fascinating how this concept of the heart keeps coming up.
It does.
It's clearly a cornerstone of Pascal's philosophy,
Yeah.
even if it might seem a little bit at odds with his scientific mind.
It is one of those paradoxes that makes Pascal so compelling.
Right.
This brilliant mathematician and logician who also recognized the limits of pure reason.
Yeah.
And the importance of those less quantifiable aspects of human experience.
And I have to admit, as someone who really values logic and reason,
Yeah.
I'm also drawn to this idea that there might be other ways of knowing, other paths to truth that go beyond the realm of the purely rational.
I think we all have those moments where we just feel something to be true, even if we can't explain it logically.
Right.
And that's what Pascal was getting at with his concept of the heart.
So how do we reconcile these two seemingly opposing forces?
Right.
The rational and the intuitive, the head and the heart. It feels like we spend so much of our lives trying to put things into neat little categories.
Yeah.
Rational or emotional. But maybe Pascal is suggesting that true understanding requires us to, be more holistic.
I think so.
And embrace both.
Yeah, and for Pascal, that meant acknowledging the limits of human reason and embracing faith as a way to access this higher truth.
Right. But for those of us who don't subscribe to a religious worldview,
Yeah.
how do we reconcile this idea of the heart with our own values? Can we embrace intuition and emotion without sort of compromising our commitment to logic and evidence?
I think we absolutely can. In fact, I'd argue that a humanist perspective actually enhances our understanding of the heart.
Okay.
Because for us, it's not about blind faith or divine revelation.
Right.
It's about cultivating empathy, compassion, and a deep understanding of the human experience.
So instead of seeing the heart as something that's opposed to reason, we can see it as a complement to it.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that there are multiple ways of knowing and understanding the world, and that sometimes those really profound truths can only be accessed through feeling and intuition.
That's right. And I think that's where Pascal's ideas become particularly relevant for us as humanists.
Yeah.
He's reminding us that there's more to life than just cold, hard facts and data. There's beauty, there's wonder, there's this deep well of human experience that can't always be quantified or explained in these purely rational terms.
And it's through that human experience, through our relationships and our connections with others, that we find meaning and purpose. We don't need some higher power to tell us what's right or wrong, what's valuable or meaningless. We can figure that out for ourselves.
We have that capacity.
By drawing on our own moral compass and our understanding of what it means to live a good life.
Pascal's work, especially when viewed through this lens, can be incredibly liberating. It reminds us that we have the freedom to create our own meaning, to shape our own destinies, even in a world that might seem chaotic and indifferent.
It also challenges us to think more critically about how we spend our time and energy.
That's true.
If we're constantly distracted, if we're constantly seeking external validation or fleeting pleasures, are we truly living authentically?
Yeah, are we honoring those reasons of the heart that Pascal saw as so essential?
Exactly, and this is where I think his ideas have a lot to offer, even centuries later.
I agree.
In a world that's increasingly dominated by technology, by algorithms designed to capture our attention and manipulate our emotions,
Right.
it's more important than ever to cultivate those things, those aspects of ourselves that make us truly human.
Our empathy, our compassion, our capacity for critical thinking and independent judgment.
It's about reclaiming our agency, our ability to choose how we want to live and what kind of world we want to create. And that's a message that resonates deeply with me as a humanist, and I hope it resonates with our listener as well.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Underweg's Pascal, I think it's worth reflecting on that question you posed earlier.
Yeah.
How do we make space for the reasons of the heart in a world that's so driven by technology and data?
It's a tough question, but I think part of the answer lies in cultivating mindfulness, in being more intentional about how we spend our time and our energy, choosing to disconnect from the digital noise every now and reconnect with ourselves, with nature, with the people we care about.
It's also about recognizing the limits of technology and being wary of its potential to manipulate and exploit our emotions. We need to be critical consumers of information to develop our own internal compass and not be swayed by the latest trends or the loudest voices.
And perhaps most importantly, it's about fostering a culture of empathy and compassion,
Right.
recognizing our shared humanity and striving to create a world where everyone feels valued and respected.
Beautifully put. And I think Pascal, despite his religious beliefs, would ultimately agree with that sentiment.
I think so too.
At the heart of his philosophy was this deep concern for the human condition
Yeah.
and a desire to help us lead more meaningful and fulfilling lives.
So for our listener, if you find yourself grappling with those big questions about meaning and purpose, if you feel a sense of awe or even terror when you look up in the night sky, or if you're simply looking for ways to cultivate more heart in your life, don't hesitate to check out Pascal's work. You might be surprised by what you discover. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.